The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard of Kensington Palace, as William stood at his bedroom window, watching the world wake up outside. His reflection stared back at him, showing a man who had aged beyond his years in recent months. The weight of responsibility had always been heavy on his shoulders, but lately, it felt crushing. Kate was still sleeping peacefully beside him when he had risen an hour earlier. Her face, even in sleep, showed the strain they had both been under. The past 6 months had tested their marriage in ways they never imagined possible. What had started as whispered conversations behind closed doors had grown into something that threatened to tear apart everything they had built together. The decision hadn't come easily. William remembered the exact moment when he knew their lives were about to change forever. It was during a quiet dinner at their country home in Norfolk, with the children safely tucked in bed upstairs. Kate had been pushing her food around her plate, lost in thought, when she finally looked up at him with tears in her eyes. "We can't keep pretending everything is fine," she had whispered, her voice barely audible above the gentle ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. "The children are starting to notice. George asked me yesterday why Daddy looked so sad all the time." That night they had talked until dawn, sharing fears and hopes they had kept buried for months. The royal duties that once brought them purpose now felt like a prison. The constant scrutiny, the endless protocols, the way their every move was dissected by the media. It had slowly eroded the foundation of who they were as individuals and as a couple. William had always known this day might come. His father had warned him about the price of duty, but nothing could have prepared him for the reality of watching the woman he loved slowly disappear behind the mask of royal obligation. Kate, who had once brought light and laughter into every room, had become increasingly withdrawn. Her smile, once genuine and infectious, now felt rehearsed and hollow. The breaking point had come 3 weeks earlier during a state dinner. Kate had excused herself halfway through the evening, claiming a headache. William found her in the palace gardens, sitting on a bench they had shared during their engagement photos, crying silently under the stars. "I don't recognize myself anymore," she had confided, her voice breaking. "I look in the mirror and see a stranger wearing my face. I'm losing pieces of myself every day, and I'm terrified that soon there won't be anything left of the Kate you fell in love with." That moment had shattered something inside William. He realized they were both drowning in expectations and traditions that felt increasingly meaningless compared to their happiness and their children's well-being. The institution he had been born to serve was consuming the very people it was supposed to protect. Now, as he stood watching the palace staff begin their daily routines below, William knew today would be different. Today they would begin the most difficult conversation of their lives, not just with each other, but with his grandmother, his father, and ultimately, with the world. Kate stirred behind him and he heard her soft footsteps approaching. Her arms wrapped around his waist from behind, and for a moment they stood together in silence, drawing strength from each other's presence. "Are you ready for this?" she asked, her breath warm against his shoulder. William turned in her arms, looking into the eyes that had captured his heart all those years ago at university. Behind the worry and exhaustion, he could still see glimpses of the spirited girl who had walked down that catwalk in a sheer dress, changing his life forever. "I'm ready to fight for us," he replied, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions raging inside him. "I'm ready to choose love over duty, even if it cost me everything." They both knew the path ahead would be treacherous. The monarchy had survived many scandals and crises, but what they were contemplating would send shockwaves through the very foundations of the institution. Yet as they held each other in the early morning light, they also knew they had no choice. Their marriage, their family, and their sanity depended on the courage to forge a different path. The first phone call would be the hardest, to his grandmother, the queen who had dedicated her entire life to the crown. But as William looked at Kate's face filled with a mixture of fear and hope, he knew that some things were worth more than tradition, more than duty, more than the approval of a nation. Their love story was about to enter its most challenging chapter, but for the first time in months, William felt a flicker of hope. Whatever came next, they would face it together as they always had, as they always would. The private study in Windsor Castle felt smaller than usual, as 3 generations of royalty sat around the mahogany table. Queen Elizabeth, now in her 90s but still sharp as ever, sat at the head of the table with her hands folded carefully in her lap. King Charles occupied the chair to her right, his face a mixture of concern and confusion. William sat across from them, his jaw set with determination while his hands trembled slightly on the polished wood. Kate had stayed behind at Kensington Palace with the children. They had agreed that this initial conversation needed to happen between the men of the family first. Though both knew Kate's absence spoke volumes about the gravity of what they were discussing. "Let me understand this correctly," the Queen said, her voice carrying the weight of 7 decades on the throne. "You wish to step back from all royal duties. Not reduce them, not modify them, but abandon them entirely." William met his grandmother's steady gaze. "Your Majesty, with the deepest respect, Kate and I feel we have no other choice. The life we're living isn't sustainable for our marriage or our children's well-being." Charles leaned forward, his voice strained. "William, you were born for this role. Everything I've done, everything your grandmother has done has been to prepare the monarchy for your reign. You can't simply walk away because things have become difficult." "Difficult?" William's voice rose slightly before he caught himself. "Father, Kate barely speaks anymore unless she's performing her royal duties. Our children ask us why we're never home, why we always look sad. George is developing anxiety about public appearances, and he's only a child." The Queen raised her hand slightly, a gesture that immediately commanded silence. "Tell me about Kate," she said softly. "How is she truly?" For the first time since entering the room, William's composure cracked. His eyes filled with tears as he thought about the woman who had been his anchor for so many years. "She's disappearing, Grandmother. Every day I watch a little more of who she is slip away. The woman I married was full of life and laughter. She could light up any room just by walking into it. Now she takes anxiety medication just to get through public engagements." The Queen's expression softened almost imperceptibly. She remembered her own struggles in the early years, the weight of expectation that had nearly broken her spirit more than once. But her generation had been taught to endure, to sacrifice personal happiness for duty. She could see that William's generation viewed these sacrifices differently. "Last month," William continued, his voice barely above a whisper, "I found her crying in Charlotte's nursery at 3 a.m. She said she felt like she was failing everyone, me, the children, the country, herself. She asked me if I would have been happier if I'd never met her." Charles shifted uncomfortably in his chair. He had always admired Kate's grace under pressure, her natural ability to connect with people. The idea that the monarchy was destroying such a vibrant spirit troubled him deeply. "Have you considered a modified role?" Charles asked. "Perhaps stepping back from some duties while maintaining others." "The Commonwealth needs continuity, William. The people need stability." William shook his head. "We've tried that approach, Father. Every compromise we've made has only delayed the inevitable. The system isn't designed for half measures. Either we're all in, or we need to find a different path entirely." The room fell silent except for the gentle ticking of an antique clock on the mantelpiece. The Queen studied her grandson's face, seeing her late husband Philip's determination mixed with her own sense of duty and Charles's sensitivity. But she also saw something else, a man fighting for his family's survival. "Tell me what you envision," she said finally. "If you step away, what then?" William straightened in his chair. "We want to live as a normal family. Kate and I can contribute to society in meaningful ways without the weight of royal protocol. We can raise our children to be good people without the burden of preparing them for a life they might not want." "And Harry?" Charles asked quietly. "Your brother chose a different path, and look how that ended. The media, the public reaction, the damage to the institution." "Harry's situation was different," William replied. "He was never going to be king, I am. That's exactly why this decision carries so much weight, and why we've agonized over it for so long." The Queen closed her eyes for a long moment, and when she opened them there was a depth of understanding that surprised both men. "I've spent 70 years putting duty before everything else. My marriage, my children, my own happiness, everything has been secondary to the crown. I believed it was the only way." She paused, looking directly at William. "But perhaps I was wrong to expect the same sacrifice from every generation. Perhaps love and happiness deserve equal consideration alongside duty." Charles stared at his mother in shock. In all his years, he had never heard her express anything but absolute commitment to royal duty. "What are you saying, Mother?" he asked. The Queen stood slowly, moving to the window that overlooked the gardens where she had played as a child. "I'm saying that I've watched this family tear itself apart in the name of tradition. I've watched marriages fail, children suffer, And good people destroy themselves trying to fit into roles that no longer serve anyone well. She turned back to face her son and grandson. If William and Kate believe this is their only path to happiness, then perhaps it's time for us to redefine what duty means in the modern world. The weight of her words settled over the room like a heavy blanket. For the first time since this ordeal began, William felt a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, they could find a way forward that didn't require destroying everything they held dear. But he also knew this was just the beginning. The hardest conversations were still ahead, with the public, with Parliament, and most importantly with their children, who would have to understand why their parents were choosing love over a crown. The children's playroom at Kensington Palace had always been Kate's favorite space in their home. Toys scattered across the soft carpet, drawings taped to the walls, and the comfortable chaos that came with 3 young lives filled the room with warmth and laughter. Today, however, the space felt heavy with the weight of the conversation that was about to unfold. George, at 10 years old, sat cross-legged on the floor, unconsciously straightening his posture the way he'd been taught during formal occasions. Charlotte, 7, curled up next to Kate on the small sofa, her intuitive nature already sensing that something important was happening. 4-year-old Louis played quietly with his toy cars, occasionally glancing up at his parents with wide, curious eyes. William knelt down to be at eye level with his children, his heart breaking as he saw his own features reflected in their young faces. These 3 beautiful souls had been born into a life they never chose, carrying expectations they were too young to understand. The weight of that realization had been crushing him for months. "We need to talk to you about some changes that are going to happen in our family," Kate began, her voice gentle but steady. She had rehearsed these words countless times, but nothing could have prepared her for the reality of looking into her children's innocent eyes while dismantling their understanding of their own lives. George looked up sharply, his young mind already jumping to conclusions. "Are you getting divorced?" he asked bluntly, having overheard similar conversations among his schoolmates' parents. "No, sweetheart," William said quickly, reaching out to touch his son's hand. "Mommy and I love each other very much. We love all of you more than anything in the world. That's actually why we need to have this conversation." Charlotte shifted closer to Kate, her small fingers finding her mother's hand. "Are we in trouble?" she whispered. Kate's heart clenched as she pulled her daughter closer. "You're not in trouble, darling. None of you have done anything wrong. Sometimes grown-ups have to make very difficult decisions to protect the people they love most." William took a deep breath, knowing there was no easy way to explain what they were about to do. "You know how Daddy has always talked about the special job our family has? How we serve the country and help people?" The children nodded, though Louis had abandoned his cars and was now listening intently. Even if he didn't fully understand, "Well, Mummy and I have realized that this special job is making our family very sad and very tired. We've been so busy with royal duties that we haven't been able to be the parents we want to be to you." George's brow furrowed in concentration. "But Great-Granny says our family has always done this job, that it's who we are." "Great-Granny is right about that," Kate said softly. "But sometimes, even when something has always been done a certain way, it's okay to choose a different path if it's better for everyone." "What does that mean for us?" Charlotte asked, her voice small and uncertain. William and Kate exchanged a look, both drawing strength from the other's presence. "It means we're going to step away from being working royals," William explained. "We won't have as many public engagements or official duties. We want to focus on being a normal family." "But I like waving to people," Louis said suddenly, causing both parents to smile despite the gravity of the moment. "You can still wave to people, little man," William assured him, "but we might not live in the palace anymore. We might move somewhere quieter where you can play in the garden without photographers watching." The concept seemed to appeal to Louis, but George looked troubled. "What about when I'm supposed to be king someday? Didn't you always say I was born for something special?" Kate felt tears threaten as she saw the confusion and concern in her eldest son's eyes. This was the conversation she had dreaded most, explaining to a 10-year-old that the future he'd been told was his destiny might no longer exist. "You are special, George," she said firmly, "but not because of a title or a crown. You're special because of who you are inside. Your kindness, your curiosity, your big heart. Those things matter more than any royal duty. But won't people be angry with us?" Charlotte asked, displaying wisdom beyond her years. William considered his answer carefully. Some people might not understand at first. Change is scary for everyone, not just children, but we believe that most people will understand that families need to take care of each other. Will we still see Great-Granny and Grandpa? George asked. Of course, Kate assured him. They're our family, and families stay together even when they make different choices. Great-Granny and Grandpa love you very much, and that will never change. Louis had crawled over to sit in William's lap, his small arms wrapping around his father's neck. Will you be happier, Daddy? You've been sad a lot. The innocent observation hit William like a physical blow. He had tried so hard to shield his children from his struggles, but clearly, he hadn't been as successful as he'd hoped. Yes, buddy, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I think we'll all be much happier. We'll be able to spend more time together, go on adventures, and just be ourselves without worrying about what everyone else thinks. Charlotte looked up at Kate with serious eyes. Will you stop taking those pills that make you sleepy? Kate's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't realized the children had noticed her anxiety medication, but clearly, they were more observant than she'd given them credit for. I think so, sweetheart, she said honestly. When people are less stressed and more happy, they usually don't need those kinds of medicines anymore. George stood up suddenly, pacing the small space with an energy that reminded both parents of William at that age. When will we tell people? Will it be on television? Soon, William said. We wanted to tell you first because you're the most important people in our lives. Whatever happens next, we'll face it together as a family. The room fell quiet as the children processed this life-changing information. Finally, Charlotte spoke up with the clarity that often comes from young minds unencumbered by adult complications. I think it's good, she announced. I like it better when you smile real smiles instead of picture smiles. As the evening progressed and the children returned to their games, William and Kate sat together watching their family. The conversation had gone better than they'd dared hope, but they both knew the real test would come in the weeks and months ahead. Still, seeing their children's resilience and understanding gave them strength for the battles yet to come. The conference room at Buckingham Palace buzzed with tension as the most senior members of the royal household gathered for an emergency meeting. Private secretaries, press officers, and constitutional experts filled the mahogany table, their faces grave as they grappled with a situation none of them had ever imagined facing. Sir Clive Manning, the Queen's private secretary for over 15 years, stood at the head of the table holding a draft statement that would change the monarchy forever. His usually steady hands trembled slightly as he reviewed the words that William and Kate had insisted upon. The constitutional implications are staggering, announced Professor Helena Whitmore, the constitutional expert hastily summoned from Oxford. We're not just talking about a step back from duties. Prince William is second in line to the throne. This could fundamentally alter the succession. The Queen's press secretary, Sarah Hendricks, looked up from her laptop where social media analytics flashed across the screen. The speculation is already out of control. Royal crisis is trending worldwide. We have approximately 6 hours before the evening news cycles begin, and if we don't control this narrative, it will control us. Meanwhile, 3 floors above in her private sitting room, the Queen sat with Kate, both women nursing cups of tea that had long gone cold. The conversation between them had been flowing for over an hour. 2 women from different generations trying to bridge a gap that seemed to grow wider with each passing moment. I never wanted this for you, the Queen said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of decades of experience. When William brought you into our family, I saw such joy in his eyes. I hoped things might be different for your generation. Kate looked up from her untouched tea, her eyes red from crying. Your Majesty, I've tried so hard to fit into this world. I've followed every protocol, smiled through every engagement, put duty before my own needs countless times. But I can feel myself disappearing, and I'm terrified of what that's doing to my children. The Queen nodded slowly, remembering her own struggles as a young mother trying to balance royal duty with raising her children. I made choices that I'm not sure I would make again, she admitted. I believed that duty required complete sacrifice, but perhaps I was wrong to expect that from everyone. In another wing of the palace, William paced his father's study, while Charles sat behind his desk, surrounded by legal documents and constitutional precedents. The relationship between father and son had always been complex, but this crisis was testing every bond between them. The Archbishop of Canterbury is flying in tonight, Charles said, his voice strained. Parliament will need to be briefed. The Commonwealth realms will demand explanations. You're asking me to help you dismantle everything I've spent my life preparing for. William stopped pacing and faced his father directly. I'm asking you to help me save my family. Isn't that what a father should do? The question hung in the air between them, heavy with years of misunderstanding and missed connections. Charles had always struggled with the balance between being a father and being heir to the throne, often feeling like he'd failed at both. Do you remember? William continued, his voice softer now. When I was 8 and you took me fishing in Scotland, no photographers, no protocol officers, just us. You told me that day that being a good man was more important than being a good king. Charles closed his eyes, the memory washing over him. It had been one of the few times in William's childhood when they had simply been father and son. Nothing more. You were right then, Father. I want to be a good man first. I want my children to have a father who's present, not just a figurehead who appears for photo opportunities. Back in the conference room, the debate was reaching fever pitch. The legal implications alone were staggering. Would William retain his place in the succession? What about his children? How would this affect the monarchy and the other Commonwealth realms? We need to consider the precedent this sets, argued Lord Pemberton, a constitutional advisor who had served 3 monarchs. If the heir to the throne can simply opt out when things become difficult, what does that say about the stability of the institution? With respect, my lord, interjected Dr. Rebecca Mills, a younger advisor who specialized in modern constitutional law.
Perhaps it's time we questioned whether an institution that drives good people to desperation is worth preserving in its current form. The room erupted in heated discussion.
Voices rising as decades of tradition clashed with the reality of a changing world. Meanwhile, in the palace nursery, the 3 Cambridge children played under the watchful eye of their nanny, Maria. The children had been unusually quiet since their conversation with their parents, processing changes they couldn't fully comprehend. George sat by the window, looking out at the tourists gathered at the palace gates. Maria, he asked suddenly, if we're not royal anymore, will people still care about us? Maria, who had been with the family since George was born, knelt beside him. People who truly care about you will always care, Your Royal Highness. Love doesn't depend on titles. Charlotte overheard the conversation and joined them at the window. I think it might be nice, she said thoughtfully. We could go to the park without people taking pictures all the time. As the day wore on, the various factions within the palace began to coalesce around a single truth. This wasn't just about William and Kate anymore. It was about the future of the monarchy itself. Could an institution that had survived wars, scandals, and social upheaval adapt to a world where personal happiness was valued alongside duty? The Queen, sitting alone in her study as evening approached, looked at the photographs lining her desk. Pictures of her children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren stared back at her, reminding her of what truly mattered. She thought about her own mother, who had reluctantly become queen, and wondered if the cycle of sacrifice was finally ready to be broken. As the sun set over London, the palace buzzed with activity. Press releases were being drafted and redrafted, constitutional experts debated precedents, and a family struggled to find a way forward that honored both love and legacy. The world was about to witness something unprecedented, a future king choosing his family over his crown, and a monarchy forced to confront whether it could evolve or would simply become another relic of a bygone era. The morning of the announcement dawned gray and drizzly, as if the weather itself reflected the somber mood within Buckingham Palace. William stood before the mirror in his dressing room, adjusting his tie for what he knew would be one of the most important speeches of his life. His hands were steady now, the trembling of the past weeks replaced by a calm determination born from absolute certainty in his choice. Kate joined him, wearing a simple navy dress that had become her signature style during royal engagements, but today there was something different about her appearance. A lightness in her eyes that hadn't been there for months, as if a tremendous weight had already begun lifting from her shoulders. Are you ready? She asked, her voice stronger than it had been in years. William turned to face her, taking in the woman who had stood by his side through everything. I've never been more ready for anything in my life. The press conference had been scheduled for 2 p.m. at St. James's Palace, chosen deliberately for its historical significance and intimate setting. Unlike the grand staterooms of Buckingham Palace, the Queen Anne room felt personal, appropriate for what was essentially a family making an extraordinary decision. By noon, journalists from around the world had gathered outside the palace gates. The speculation had reached fever pitch overnight, with rumors ranging from divorce to serious illness to constitutional crisis. The reality, as they would soon learn, was somehow both simpler and more profound than any of their theories. Inside the palace, the Queen sat in her private study with Philip's photograph on the desk before her. She had been thinking about her late husband constantly since William's decision became final. Philip had always championed putting family first, often clashing with palace officials who prioritized duty above all else. She wondered what he would have said about this moment. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, and William entered with Charlotte holding his hand. "Great Granny," Charlotte said with the directness that only children possess. "Daddy says you might be sad about our decision. We don't want you to be sad." The Queen's composed expression cracked slightly as she looked down at her great-granddaughter's earnest face. "I'm not sad, darling. I'm proud of your daddy for making such a brave choice." William squeezed Charlotte's hand gently. "Would you like to stay with Great Granny while Mummy and I go talk to the reporters?" Charlotte nodded, immediately moving to sit beside the Queen. As William prepared to leave, his grandmother's voice stopped him. "William," she said, her voice carrying 7 decades of wisdom and experience, "what you're doing today takes more courage than any battle I've ever witnessed. Your grandfather would be proud." The words hit William with unexpected force. Philip had always been his champion, the one royal who understood the suffocating nature of protocol and tradition. Knowing he had his grandmother's blessing felt like receiving absolution. At 1:45 p.m., William and Kate walked hand in hand down the corridor leading to the Queen Anne room. Palace staff lined their path, many with tears in their eyes. These people had watched the couple struggle, had seen Kate's gradual retreat from public life, had witnessed William's growing frustration with constraints that seemed designed to strangle rather than support. Sarah Hendricks, the press secretary, met them at the door. "Your Royal Highnesses, there are over 200 journalists in there, plus live broadcast to an estimated global audience of 500 million people. Are you certain you want to proceed?" Kate and William exchanged a look, then both nodded. "We're certain," Kate said, her voice clear and strong. As they entered the room, the cacophony of camera clicks and whispered speculation fell silent. William approached the podium with Kate beside him, and for a moment they simply stood together, drawing strength from each other's presence. "Good afternoon," William began, his voice carrying easily through the suddenly silent room. "Thank you all for coming today. Catherine and I have asked you here to share some important news about our family's future." He paused, looking directly into the main camera that would carry his words around the world. "For the past several years, Catherine and I have had the honor of serving the British people and the Commonwealth in our roles as working members of the royal family. This service has been both a privilege and a responsibility that we have never taken lightly." Kate stepped slightly closer to the microphone. "However, after much careful consideration and many difficult conversations, we have made the decision to step back from our roles as senior working royals, effective immediately." The room erupted. Reporters shouted questions. Camera flashes exploded like lightning, and the sound of rapid typing filled the air. William raised his hand for silence. "Please let us finish our statement," he said calmly. "We know this decision will come as a surprise to many, and we want to be completely transparent about our reasoning." Kate took over, her voice gaining strength with each word. "The truth is that the demands of royal life have become incompatible with our ability to be the parents and partners we want to be. Our children deserve to have parents who are present, not constantly torn between duty and family. We have not made this decision lightly," William continued. "We understand the disappointment this may cause, and we deeply respect the institution of the monarchy and all it represents. However, we believe that the best way we can serve our family and our values is by choosing a different path." A veteran royal correspondent raised her hand. "Sir, does this mean you're renouncing your place in the line of succession?" William had prepared for this question, knowing it would be among the first asked. "That is a matter for Parliament and the constitutional experts to determine. What I can say is that Catherine and I will continue to support Her Majesty the Queen and the monarchy, in whatever way we can, while prioritizing our family's well-being. Another reporter called out, "What will you do now? How will you support yourselves?" Kate smiled for the first time during the press conference, and for a moment, the room saw a glimpse of the radiant woman who had captured the world's heart. During her engagement announcement years earlier, "We plan to live as privately as possible while continuing to contribute to the causes we care about. We want our children to grow up knowing they can choose their own paths in life, free from the constraints of duty they never asked for." The questions continued for another 20 minutes, but the core message had been delivered. A future king had chosen love over legacy, family over duty, and in doing so, had forever changed the conversation about what it means to serve one's country. As they left the room, William and Kate walked with lighter steps than they had in years, knowing that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them as a united family, free to write their own story at last. The reaction was swift and divided. Within hours of the press conference, social media exploded with hashtags supporting and condemning the decision. "I Choose Love" trended alongside "Near Royal Duty," creating a digital battlefield where millions of people debated the merits of personal happiness versus institutional obligation. Television news programs cleared their schedules for emergency coverage. Royal experts who had spent decades analyzing every gesture and outfit choice now found themselves grappling with something entirely unprecedented. Constitutional scholars were hauled into studios to explain succession laws that had never been tested in this way. At 10 Downing Street, the Prime Minister convened an emergency cabinet meeting. The constitutional implications were staggering. What did this mean for the monarchy's role in government? How would it affect Britain's relationship with the Commonwealth realms? Would other countries follow suit and remove the British monarch as their head of state? But it was the human reaction that proved most telling. Outside Kensington Palace, crowds began gathering. Not protesters or critics, but ordinary people carrying flowers, cards, and signs of support. Young mothers brought their children, explaining that sometimes even grown-ups need to make hard choices to protect their families. Emma Richardson, a 34-year-old teacher from Manchester, traveled to London specifically to show her support. "I've watched Kate struggle for years," she told a BBC reporter. You could see it in her eyes, the sadness, the exhaustion. No one should have to sacrifice their mental health for a job, even if it's a royal job. The sentiment was echoed across the Commonwealth. In Canada, Prime Minister Jennifer Walsh issued a statement praising William and Kate's courage. Leadership sometimes means knowing when to step aside for the greater good. In this case, the greater good is their family's well-being and their children's future happiness. Not everyone was supportive. Traditional monarchists felt betrayed, arguing that duty and service were the very foundations of the royal system. Lord Halifax, a prominent conservative peer, appeared on Question Time declaring, "If everyone simply abandoned their responsibilities when things became difficult, civilization would collapse. The royal family exists to set an example of service above self." But for every critic, there seemed to be 10 supporters. Social media filled with stories from ordinary people sharing their own experiences of choosing family over career, love over duty. The hashtag #GaukMyFamilyFirst became a rallying cry for parents who had made similar difficult decisions on a smaller scale. Inside the palace walls, the royal family was processing their own complex emotions. Prince Harry called from California within hours of the announcement, his voice thick with emotion as he spoke to his brother. "I'm proud of you," Harry said simply. "I know how hard this must have been, but you're doing the right thing. Meg and I are here for whatever you need." The conversation between the brothers lasted for nearly 2 hours, healing wounds that had festered for years. Harry understood better than anyone the crushing weight of royal expectations and the courage it took to walk away. Princess Anne, known for her no-nonsense approach to royal duty, surprised many with her public statement of support. "William and Catherine have served with distinction and dignity. If they believe this path is best for their family, then we should respect that decision and wish them well." The children, meanwhile, were adapting to their new reality with the resilience that only young people possess. George had initially worried about disappointing his great-grandmother, but after a private conversation with the Queen, he emerged with a lighter step and a genuine smile. "Great-Granny says being happy is more important than being king," he told his parents that evening. "She says there are lots of ways to help people that don't require wearing a crown." Charlotte had taken to drawing pictures of their family in their new life, depicting them at picnics, on beaches and in gardens without any photographers in sight. Her artistic vision of their future was both touching and telling, a family finally free to simply be together. 4-year-old Louis, too young to fully understand the complexities, had adapted quickest of all. His primary concern was whether they would still have ice cream for dessert, a question that made both parents laugh for the first time in weeks. International reaction varied dramatically. European royal families, many of whom had modernized their own institutions, generally offered support. King Felipe of Spain and Queen Maxima of the Netherlands both issued private messages of understanding and solidarity. The most surprising reaction came from Japan, where Emperor Naruhito broke with protocol to issue a personal statement. The courage to prioritize family harmony and personal well-being reflects the highest values of leadership. Their decision deserves respect and admiration. Religious leaders weighed in as well. The Archbishop of Canterbury, after initial shock, issued a thoughtful statement about the sanctity of family and the importance of mental health. Sometimes the greatest service we can provide is ensuring our own well-being so that we can better serve others. A week after the announcement, opinion polls showed a remarkable shift in public sentiment. While initial reactions had been mixed, support for William and Kate's decision grew steadily as people had time to reflect. A YouGov poll showed 68% of Britons supported their choice, with even higher numbers among younger demographics. Perhaps most significantly, applications to mental health charities spiked by 300% in the week following the announcement. Kate's honest discussion of her struggles had opened a national conversation about anxiety, depression, and the importance of seeking help. The conversation extended beyond Britain's borders. In Australia, a constitutional convention was called to discuss removing the British monarch as head of state. In Canada, similar discussions began. Rather than weakening the monarchy's global influence, William and Kate's decision seemed to be accelerating conversations about what modern governance should look like. As the initial shock began to settle, a clearer picture emerged. This wasn't just a family choosing happiness over duty. It was a generational shift that reflected changing values around work-life balance, mental health, and the price of public service. The monarchy would survive, as it had survived previous crises. But it would be forever changed by a couple who dared to put love first, reminding the world that sometimes the most radical act is simply choosing to be human in a system designed to make you superhuman. Their quiet revolution was just beginning, and its effects would ripple through history long after the headlines faded. 6 months later, the small cottage in the Cotswolds felt more like home than any palace ever had. William stood in the kitchen making breakfast while Kate sat at the worn wooden table, helping Louis with his reading. The morning light streamed through windows that had no bulletproof glass, no security screens, just simple panes that let in the world outside. George burst through the back door, muddy from exploring the stream that ran behind their property. In the old life, such an entrance would have prompted immediate action from staff to clean and change him. Now Kate simply smiled and tossed him a towel. "Did you find any tadpoles?" she asked, and George's excited chatter filled the kitchen as he described his discoveries. It was a scene so normal, so beautifully ordinary, that both parents had to pause to appreciate how far they had traveled from their former lives. The transition hadn't been without challenges. The media attention had been intense for the first few months, with photographers camping outside every property they visited. But gradually, as it became clear that William and Kate were serious about their desire for privacy, the coverage had diminished to occasional sightings and respectful distance. The legal and constitutional matters had been resolved more smoothly than anyone had anticipated. Parliament had passed an amendment allowing William to retain his place in the succession while stepping back from active royal duties, essentially creating a new category of inactive heir. The children remained in the line of succession, but would be free to choose their own paths when they came of age. Financially, they had been more prepared than many realized. Years of careful planning and investments, combined with William's inheritance from his mother, provided security without the need for public funding. They had also established a foundation that allowed them to continue charitable work on their own terms. Kate had bloomed in ways that surprised even those closest to her. The anxiety that had plagued her final years as a working royal had largely disappeared, replaced by an energy and joy that reminded everyone why William had fallen in love with her in the first place. She had begun writing, first a blog about family life that gained millions of followers, then a book about finding balance in modern parenthood. William had thrown himself into environmental causes, working with organizations focused on climate change and conservation. Without the constraints of royal protocol, he could speak more freely and take stronger positions on issues he cared about. His work with veterans' charities had continued and expanded, drawing on his military experience in ways that royal duties had never allowed. The children were thriving in ways that validated every difficult decision their parents had made. George attended the local village school, where he was simply George Cambridge rather than a future king. His teachers reported that he was a thoughtful, kind boy who showed natural leadership qualities without the pressure of predetermined destiny. Charlotte had discovered a passion for art and spent hours painting landscapes and portraits. Her work showed a freedom of expression that might have been stifled by royal expectations. She had made friends easily in their new community, children who saw her as just another classmate rather than a princess. Louis, now 5, had adapted best of all. He had no memory of the constant scrutiny and protocol that had marked his early years. To him, this life of muddy adventures and kitchen table breakfasts was simply normal. The relationship with the extended royal family had healed more quickly than anyone had dared hope. The Queen, now approaching her 97th birthday, had made several private visits to their cottage. During one memorable afternoon, she had sat in their garden teaching Charlotte to sketch, while William and George built a treehouse nearby. "I understand now," she had told Kate during one of these visits. "I spent so many years believing that duty required sacrifice of everything else. But watching your family now, seeing how happy and whole you all are, I realize that perhaps the greatest duty is to take care of those we love." Charles had been slower to come around, but a breakthrough had come during the children's summer holidays. He had arrived for what was meant to be a brief visit and ended up staying for 3 days, enchanted by the simple pleasure of being a grandfather without the formality of palace protocol. Watching him play football with the boys in the garden, Kate had seen glimpses of the father William had always wanted him to be. Harry and Meghan had visited from California, and the reunion between the brothers had been healing for the entire family. The cousins had played together while the adults talked late into the night about their shared experiences of choosing family over institution. The public response had evolved as well. Initial shock had given way to something approaching admiration. Polls consistently showed majority support for their decision, and William and Kate had become symbols of putting family first in an age when work-life balance was a universal struggle. Their Christmas card that year had gone viral, not an official portrait, but a candid shot of all 5 of them laughing around their kitchen table, flour in their hair from an afternoon of baking. The image captured everything their decision had been about, choosing real moments over perfect pictures, authentic joy over performed duty. As winter gave way to spring, William often found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought them here. Standing in their garden one evening, watching Kate push Louis on the swing while George and Charlotte played tag nearby, he felt a peace he hadn't experienced since his university days. The sound of laughter drew his attention back to the present. Kate had captured Louis mid-swing in her phone camera, and his delighted giggles filled the air. It was a sound that had been absent from their lives for too long, pure, uncomplicated joy. "Daddy, come push me too," Charlotte called, and William jogged over to lift his daughter onto the swing beside her brother. As he pushed both children, Kate moved to stand beside him, her hand finding his. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching their children soar against the backdrop of the setting sun. "Any regrets?" Kate asked softly, a question she had stopped asking months ago but occasionally revisited. William considered the question seriously, as he always did. He thought about the crown he would never wear, the state occasions he would never attend, the centuries of tradition that would continue without his direct participation. Then he looked at his family, really looked at them. George's genuine laughter as he urged William to push him higher, Charlotte's artistic spirit shining through even in play, Louis's pure joy in the simple pleasure of flying through the air, Kate's relaxed smile, free from the weight of obligation and expectation. "Never," he said finally, squeezing Kate's hand. We chose love, and love chose us back. As the sun set over their small corner of the world, the family that had once lived in palaces made their way back to their cottage. Muddy shoes left by the door and homework spread across the kitchen table. It was beautifully, perfectly ordinary. And for the first time in years, that was exactly how they wanted it to be. Their quiet goodbye to royal life had become a hello to something far more precious, a life where love truly conquered all, where duty meant taking care of each other first, and where happiness was not sacrificed on the altar of tradition. The story that had moved millions to tears was not ending. It was just beginning, one ordinary, extraordinary day at a time.